glasses on.
Is it possible to project it so that we can see it a little bit bigger? And project it for the audience as well, or not? Sure.
Sounds like it's a really complicated subject.
He doesn't know if he's going to enlarge it, so we're going to
Place them in one like box.
Well, but that's the issue, is like each box is just one cell.
Yeah. See, there's one phone.
How's that?
That's great, thank you.
So one of the things that we've tried to do for the board when we received the request, I believe one of the things that was asked by the board is sort of take your best guess at some very high-level options. And what would it take to implement this in 2015, or fall 2015, fall 2016, and fall 2017? So understand, the way we treated this analysis is typically 2015 and 16 will be somewhat identical. The only difference will be the timeline. So you're looking at a 7-month implementation roughly versus a 19-month implementation. In 2017, it's really zero base is what you're starting with, because you're adding a new high school. You're doing grade reconfiguration, and then your boundaries will change. So whatever you do in 2015 and 16 will automatically change in 2017. So one of the things that we, hey, where did this start?
Sorry, I'm controlling it. Sorry.
It got a little bit clearer when Larry overrode that,
I
so
can run it.
a little bit bigger.
Just tell me what you want to see and I can pull it.
So we're looking at 2015. Let's just talk about the baseline. Yep. Okay. So I think the one important thing is to measure everything against a baseline. So what we've tried to do for you as a board is identify the baseline, basically the start times. We took a look at some tiers. So I know we've been talking about bell time start, but there's this tier that we really have to do that requires us to actually pick up the kids before we can bring them to school, and then actually pick them up from school and then drop them off at home, okay? And this tier usually takes somewhere between 45 and 55 minutes based on the size of the district, so mileage that we have to drive, as well as the amount of kids that we have to pick up, okay? Also in this baseline, what we try to do is we've made many assumptions. So this is very high level. We've sort of just said what if scenarios from a high level perspective. And then we've tried to identify some impacts as we went through. And then also listed some real rough cost factors down on the bottom. So rough number of buses we would take, number of drivers, rough operating costs, really a rough capital costs. Okay? So when we talk about our options, what we've tried to do is look at options that we could somewhat implement today, which would be somewhat quite difficult given some of the timelines in 2015, but maybe 2016 may have a little bit more flexibility. So what you see, and I think one of the first ones is column C, which is roll the entire system 40 minutes back. We believe if there's going to be something that you do, rolling the systems 40-minute back may be an option, with the caveat that your late elementaries will start at 9:55. Okay. So I believe that would then let out at 4:20, and roughly between a 30 to 45-minute bus ride to get home would be what is required on the PM aspects of it. Okay? So we believe that's somewhat of a cost neutral, and when we say cost neutral, we're in the rough guesstimates of a couple $100,000, $100,000, couple $100,000 is what we're thinking. Okay. The second option, or option D, that we looked at was transportation.
Can I just clarify one thing
Sure,
on that?
sure.
And that keeps all the programs in place, the current programs in place?
That's
They're
the
rolling
assumption,
system
that's the
back.
assumption that we're making today, yes. Right. Right. So, transportation option D, I think this was kind of our wild, what would this transition plan look like if we could transition something in 2015 and 16? Right, and you would have a 7:40 high school start time, an 8:15 start for your junior high, a 8:55 to 9:10 start for your early elementary, and a 9:25 to 9:30, I believe, start for your late elementary. So something a little bit more reasonable. Everybody's getting out by 4 p.m. And I believe this cost here, Larry, where are we?
We are.
Yep, so somewhere about $800,000 is what you're looking at, right, from your baseline.
And our latest elementary starts at 9:15 currently?
Let me double check that.
Yes.
Yes, I'm getting yeses,
We're talking a 15-minute difference.
roughly.
Roughly.
Right, and it's sort of, if you look at it, I think it's somewhat squeezing a little bit more in the middle to make some of these runs work, right? And the cost difference would be, and for us, the biggest issue that we're having to transport is on the eastern part of our district, where it's sort of a big service area for the Woodinville High School. And unfortunately, there's only one road that goes east and west, which is the Woodinville Duval Road. Okay. The next option that we looked at, I believe, was the board asked us what it would take to start at 8 o'clock. So we sort of just said, what would this start at 8 o'clock? Knowing that we would probably have to run separate tiers. We would have to run a high school tier at 8 o'clock, and then your junior high would start somewhere around 7:55, early elementary 8:30, and a late elementary at 9:15. So really, there's no change at the middle school, at the junior high, early elementary, or late elementary. Okay. And then we were asked to take a look at what it would take to start at 8:30, real similar. You would have to run somewhat of a separate tier system. You would have to break the high schools out separately and run that somewhat independently of the junior high, early elementary, and then the late elementary. Okay. And then option G was to only take a look at basic and special ed required programs. So any choice programs would be, we wouldn't provide that transportation. 9th grade shuttles to high schools, music, CTE would be the other program that we wouldn't provide transportation for. Okay. At an 8 o'clock, at an 8 o'clock start time.
Is that also by cap? Not included in
No, anything that is required by the state of feds, we would have to provide. Okay. The other option we took a look at is what happens if we did a flipping model. So we flip the early elementaries, start them a little early at 7:55, high school at 8:40, junior highs at 9 o'clock, and then a late elementary at 9:20.
And did that have any choice programs?
That would have all the choice programs in it, yes.
What is the increase in cost in that if we're flipping?
I would say it's close to $4 million.
Why is there an increase if we would be flipping the times?
Well, if you look at the difference, we probably need about, I think 40 minutes. We probably need about 40 minutes, 45 minutes between each one of our tiers. And so if you look at, we're shortening up some of the tiers there. Your biggest run right now, or your what we transport the most kids with, is our junior high sort of tier. We're doing all junior high schools as well as other programs, and then your music. That's your sort of your biggest tier that you're moving. Option I believe, is we looked at just comboing some of the service area. So some of our junior highs with elementary, so if they're neighboring each other, what would it look like as we comboed some of this? Now, not all of our schools are located next to each other, but the schools that are, we looked at some type of comboing. And so we would have a high school, early elementary at 8:40, a junior high, some of the early elementaries at 7:55. So you sort of have this staggered start times moving through there. Okay. And then the last one was, the next one is column J, which is staggering high school start times. Because as I said, the Woodinville area is somewhat of your biggest area, we would start Bothell and Inglemoor a little bit earlier, with Woodinville starting a little bit later, and then still leave your junior highs at 7:55, early elementaries at 8:30, and then your late elementaries at 9 o'clock. And then we also then just looked at what a two-tiered model looks like. I believe majority of the state runs a two-tier model, but majority of the state, I think, is much smaller, right? Their area may be similar size, but I think right now we're transporting somewhere around 10,000 kids to and from school. So in the, since the last board meeting, this was sort of our this is what we think. The thing that we would need some time with is once the board makes a decision, we would then have to do a much deeper dive around the true impacts, what we think the true impacts may be, both from an operational perspective and then a cost perspective. Okay. So 2015 and 16 is going to look really similar. As I said, the only difference would be the implementation timeline, 7 months versus 19 months. And then 2017, it's a whole new animal. You're dealing with a lot of different variables that you would have to put in, which in 2017, we've kind of identified as zero-based modeling.
Well, I know I speak for the board when I say that we really appreciate how open and how thoughtful you were in presenting this. I know this represents a lot of work on your part in the midst of the other work that you're doing. So thank you very much. So I'll just, we have a big topic. I'll just ask what board members see on this and kind of maybe what your thinking is. And I will, Dawn did, you saw it in your emails, but she wanted it in the record as well. I think I'll just read it now instead of waiting until the resolution, but she just says, as you're aware, I have had to suddenly leave town to tend to family matters. I realize this is at an inopportune time for our discussion on later start times. I've reviewed board material and remain dedicated to the students of North Shore School District and their well-being. I firmly believe that school start times should absolutely be no earlier than 8:30 and feel torn about the discussion we had at the last meeting where 8 o'clock at the earliest start time was arrived at. This is not in line with the American Association of Pediatrics recommendation. Therefore, start time of 8 o'clock is unacceptable to me. I am not asking for additional discussion time on this resolution because I want to see us pursue an 8:30 start time by 2015. It is within the parameters, and I will continue the discussion about moving forward with a more specific start time deadline if necessary at the next meeting. In addition, I want to reiterate on record what I actually support moving forward. I support a school start time of no earlier than 8:30 and 7 class periods provided to secondary students to fulfill their requirements. I support buses providing transportation at the beginning of first period, which starts no earlier than 8:30, and at the end of 7th period, whatever that becomes with the prior requirements. This used to be basically understood in education. It has become a pinching and scrimping nightmare at our children's cost. It is time to prioritize children and their programs, not salary increases for adults. I look forward to further rich conversation about this topic. So that's her thoughts on this particular topic.
And Brian, do you mind if I ask you a question? And if this is, again, this is one of those eyeball things, but it came up often in the 2015 analysis, and that's the mention of contracting transportation services out. And I'm not very familiar with how that would work, how it might interact with our existing transportation system, kind of, even if it's just a very ballpark, it'd help me to understand a little bit what you were referring to.
So currently we have a 3-year contract that is somewhat closed.
It's completely closed.
It's completely
And
closed.
the teachers have actually told us that there is no interest in reopening the contract, and they have no obligation to do so. Nor would they. They would see addressing any of this 2.5 years from now as pretty regressive, and we would probably have significant difficulties getting an agreement, a successor agreement with them. So that's what they've been communicating to us thus far. Just to be honest with you.
And are they referring to the discussion in general, the discussion around contracting?
Around
Contract.
The contracting, okay.
There's a bar in the contract, or in the collective bargaining agreement against us subcontracting out to and from that, so.
Okay.
And
So
that would be a difficult thing to bargain in any circumstance, so just.
All right, Jeff?
I think that was a postscript that we received an email on. Didn't I see that, or that went to everyone?
I did not see that.
You didn't see that? Oh, where did I read it? Oh, okay. Okay, that was just today.
Okay,
I would good something if we could each get a copy.
Yes, it will be in the, it will
Or
be
great.
forwarded to you.
Okay,
Yeah,
perfect.
it was a late-breaking thing, sorry.
Okay.
Okay, so then the discussion about contracting versus no, perhaps we should, understand the implications. Okay, thank you.
Do board members have any other questions for Ryan? Sorry, Ryan. Might as well get you before you go sit down.
I had a question about the efficiency rating. If it was lowered, what is the actual estimated dollar cost? So let's say it went to 95% or 90%. Are we talking hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars or tens of thousands of dollars that the district would lose?
Not exactly sure. So what we would have to do is model this with the state efficiency. Our understanding of the state efficiency model is regardless of what you spend operationally, they're only going to reimburse you X amount. So for us, currently right now, $5 million is the quote-unquote 100% efficiency rating. Now, if we choose to increase that cost, they're only going to reimburse you $5 million. And
If our efficiency rating went down, let's say we stayed with, if our efficiency rating went down, how much would that,
I'm not sure.
not necessarily if our transportation costs went up?
Yeah, I'm not sure of that.
But I think what I hear you asking is, would that $5 million then go down to
Four
million,
yeah,
whatever.
Is it
Yeah,
like-
you're
is it
going
a
to
few
lose
hundred, or is
some
it
sort
like-
of funding. I'm just not sure what that would look like until we actually run the details of that.
Does the state reimburse us for new buses?
Yes, so the state has a depreciation schedule. I believe it's on an 8-year cycle right now. So some of our buses started on a 13 or 20-year cycle, and they've adjusted the depreciation timeline to about an 8-year cycle. Right now, the state has a base of what they're going to reimburse you, which is about $110,000. And that's statewide, regardless of any additions you add. So think of this as buying a car with no bumper and automatic manual windows. So that's what they're going to reimburse you, about $110,000. We probably spend on a big bus somewhere around $132,000 for a big bus. Now, on your smaller buses, I believe the state will reimburse you about $55,000. But that may not include any wheelchair access, certain components on the buses that is required for your e-buses. And we typically spend somewhere around $68,000. So there's still a gap. They may say they reimburse you at 100%, but there's a gap to what our needs may require.
So when we're looking at the cost, projected cost, does that include the money that's reimbursed by the state? Or are we saying this is what we're going to spend and we're not including in those costs what the state would reimburse us?
Yeah, so if we scroll down, Larry, yeah, if you look at OSPI vehicle fund receivables and we scroll across, so currently right now in our our district account, TVF account, we have about $4.8 million. And what we've tried to factor in there is if you added more costs to your buses, and we've tried to list the cost of the buses out there, you would receive more money from your OSPI vehicle fund receivables.
But Ryan, but OSPI only reimburses us if we own the bus.
If we own the
That's what I'm saying, if we buy new buses, and
If we
it's
buy-
not buying old buses, correct? You have
No,
to buy
it
new
has to be
buses.
buying new buses.
And we don't get the full cost reimbursed at once, it's over a period of
Period
8
of time,
years.
Yeah.
And we don't get the upfront money to add to the fleet. Even
Yes.
for enrollment growth, we don't get money to add to the
Yes. So the district usually always front funds everything, and then we're reimbursed at the end. So real similar to our reimbursement from the state, we're always somewhat a year behind in our collection of revenues.
So the 4.2 million that's currently in our transportation vehicle fund,
That's-
has that been budgeted towards anything?
No.
Well, yes and no.
Well,
We have a long-term replacement plan that already is underfunded.
yes, so, yes, you're correct, Larry. So, my mistake. So if you look at our replacement cost for our fleet today, I believe in our baseline it's $15.3 million. If we just look at what we totally have in cash on hand, TVF, and whatever the state's going to reimburse us, it's about $9 million. So we are still, there's a gap of about $6 million just to replace our current fleet today.
But we potentially could borrow that money and pay ourselves back, potentially, because we're not using it right now.
Yes, when you receive it. So you won't receive the $4.2 million all at one time. It's going to be on some type of schedule based on when you purchase
But we have
your
4.8
buses.
in there right now.
We have 4.8 in
Okay,
there right now.
that's correct. We could borrow that potentially upfront, knowing that we're going to get part back from the state, if we purchase new buses.
Yes.
Do we know how many buses are close to the end of their lives?
No.
Yeah.
No. I think
Thank
we
you
had a
for
big
your honesty.
purchase, yeah. I think when the last that we looked at our fleet, I think we had this giant purchase sometime in 1990, where we purchased about 50 or 60 buses. And these are the buses that we are trying to move out of the system or roll out of the inventory.
We've been replacing a handful of buses every year for the last several years.
Yep.
So the new buses would need, I'm assuming, more bus drivers. What is the realistic possibility of hiring that many bus drivers by this summer?
Good question. So let me share a bit of what we've done over the last 2 years. So over the last 2 years, we've probably received about 70 applications
Over the last 2 years?
Yeah.
Total?
total. We've probably interviewed all 70. We've hired 50 of the 70. And today we retain 45 of the 50 that we hired.
So, just I thought about this a little bit, we heard a little bit in the public comments. One of the things that we've done in recent years through our tiering of systems is trying to get more of our routes into this, more of our drivers into the 6 to 8 hour a day range between their morning and afternoon shifts. As we add buses and sort of decrease our efficiency, we'd be looking at those shifts getting shorter than 6 to 8 hours. So there's a question, I think a legitimate question, as to whether or not that would be more attractive for people who might be interested in more part-time type of work and might add to our applicant pool, or whether it would be a detraction from people wanting to apply or wanting to remain with us if all of a sudden what used to be a 6 or an 8 hour a day position is now a 4 to a 6 hour day position.
And that's just an unknown, we probably
It
have
is
to
an
ask these
unknown,
questions.
correct. And
to find that
it's
out.
probably going to be variable. For some people it might be more attractive, and for others it might not be, but it is an unknown.
I believe at a minimum, we are obligated to 4.5 hours per day. So that's the minimum that we're required to.
In scenario C, we have early elementary, excuse me, and late elementary. So if we were to roll the entire system back 40 minutes, is there 5 elementaries that we start late that would be fall into that late elementary category? 8. Is that how many? There's 8.
Good for you.
What's the possibility of combining together early elementary and late elementary? So that might require, obviously that would require more costs, which I understand that,
Yeah.
but might not have a huge impact when we're looking at how many more buses and how much it will cost the district.
Honestly, I can't answer that right now.
Okay, that's okay. That was just one thought I had is about that combo.
Yeah.
So along that
I
line, can
think-
I ask Kathleen a question? My understanding of why, and correct me if I'm wrong, why we have 2 different times is that those 8 schools have specialty programs? No, that's not the case.
It's based on
It's based on
transportation.
transportation.
Yeah, so basically my understanding is that given the number of buses we have, we can't do all of the elementaries at the same time. So we have to stagger those elementaries. And so as you look at the tiers, we have these 3 to 4 tiers. Most of our drivers are driving a 4-tier system.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So that's what I was going to say. Conceptually, what that does is if you have all the elementary start at one time, you're just eliminating a tier from the system. So you're going to need more buses and drivers.
Right.
That's, I understand, yeah. I do understand that would take more, but it would be less than some of these other options that we're talking
Yeah,
about.
I don't know what
Yeah,
that would be.
It's okay. I just didn't know if we could do that, if that was a,
That could be an option.
Any other questions for Ryan? I don't see any. Thank you, Ryan. Both the information and the presentation. So, so this is an information item tonight. So it gives us an opportunity to look at it in public and discuss it in public. It is not an action item tonight, so there's no action required on it, but it would be good to just air what we're thinking or what we see from it and what we see as possibilities.
do you want to go first, Tammy?
You know, I don't know if I want to go first, and the reason why I'm not trying to be flip, but I'm trying in my head to have this as a combined intellectual exercise with the resolution.
Right,
That
which
makes
is why it's
sense.
on
Yeah,
there.
and so it's not with the resolution. So, talking, I certainly, made lots of notes, and I would have more questions if we're at the point where we could dive deeper, even into the 2017 options presented. I have questions and thoughts, but since this was presented as a very rough cut, I didn't want to dive into what's supposed to be at this point just a rough cut. Does that make sense?
So maybe a better question would be, what would you like to see next? What would you see as the next step?
I just want to first thank you guys for putting that together. I know it was a lot of work, and it's nice to be able to see different scenarios, different options. It gives us a place to start talking and dialogue about, you know, what are the possibilities for implementing later start, and what do we not want to give up, and what, you know, can we live with. And so I appreciate you giving us like 10 different options. That wasn't too many in my book. I'd like to see us, and I know we're missing one of our board members, but as Ryan said, this is a high level at this point. And where it gave us positives and, you know, negatives in each scenario. I would like to see as a board, and I know that we got this so late, so I know, you know, I didn't go through it as thoroughly as I would have if, you know, we had more time and there wasn't that opportunity on either side. So, but that we would narrow this down as a board to 3 or 4 options, and then ask the transportation department at that point to now dig deeper into those. So as a board, we would choose what our 3 or 4 options are and say, here's our best ones. You know, with these other ones we don't think will work, and then that would be what I would put forth. That might take another special session to do that.
So I would just like to say a couple of things.
Okay.
One is that the same people that are doing this are also doing the enrollment demographics task force work that is being rolled out this coming week. So there's a lot of work involved there. And I think that before we ask staff to go any farther, I think that it's the board's responsibility to identify what we would find acceptable and what we wouldn't find acceptable. And I think the draft that Larry gave us in our briefing about, you know, start and dismissal time parameters, program service and fiscal parameters would be a really important conversation to have with all 5 of us present before we task staff with doing work that will not translate necessarily into something actionable. You know what I mean? I think we need to identify the parameters a little more specifically before we ask them to do more work. And that's just my opinion.
Yeah, and maybe we can do that within 3 scenarios, I guess is what I'm.
But I think I'm hearing a commonality that we're both interested in moving this along and narrowing what the options, and I'll just second triple that. Because there certainly is an increase in anxiety in the community as a result of this, that what is a priority for them may be on the cutting block, and I think the sooner that we can relieve that anxiety would be helpful. So I like the idea of having a conversation in the near future of creating whether it's narrowing it down to 3 options or what our parameters are, but I think we need to get that out sooner than later as to what the negative consequences of this are going to be so that people know.
And I'd suggest that a couple of things. One is going through the exercise of developing those parameters might lead you to the options that are acceptable then to the board, given, you know, the decisions that would be made around programs and expenditures and those kinds of things, and start and dismissal times. But they also provide, what's difficult now is for transportation and modeling is to know what to put in or out of the model, you know, and what isn't acceptable in the model. So the wider that window of start and dismissal time parameters, and the wider the window of programs that can or cannot be within the mix, then they can do modeling around those at a much more detailed level. I mean, right now they're trying to make some assumptions, but it's going to be, by definition, a somewhat inaccurate process or a somewhat incomplete process, because, you know, we don't know whether those are the right assumptions to be making. So I think that going through that exercise of developing those parameters would help us put a finer point on this much more rapidly. Is that fair statement, Ryan?
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, here's a suggestion, because the other piece of it is that I think the longer we delay, the more difficult we make it for everybody concerned. And my feeling, my strong feeling is that whatever we propose, we need to also publish and give other people an opportunity to weigh in on that are going to be impacted by it one way or another. I don't think that we have a process that's sound if we don't do that piece. So I'm going to suggest that we individually fill out the start time, start and dismissal time parameters, and then come back as a,
Well, that could be one way of doing it. Well, it's kind of a simplified document, but there are ramifications and implications for each one of those parameters on there that may be difficult for board members to do in isolation without having a full understanding of what those may be. I would suggest that you might benefit by having that be an exercise that you do with staff where you could perhaps bounce off, well, what would that mean if, for instance, elementary and high school start times were flipped? You know, I mean, there's certainly a community interest in that question. There's also programmatic ramifications of that as well, as far as how many buses would be on the, you know, what the needs of the transportation system would be, that I think would be important to understand as you're sort of making those choices.
I agree that's an important step, but I think there are some things that we can eliminate because looking at it, we know that they're not going to be acceptable items to us. So that's the work I'd like to see us do individually ahead of time. So knowing that we don't have any study sessions that are free, I'm thinking that we should just put this on the agenda for the next meeting.
And then maybe we can see within those scenarios where what might fit at the same time. You know, looking at the scenarios, did they already kind of address that in those? Like pushing the whole system back, pretty much everything stays. So if we put the whole system back 40 minutes.
Yeah, and I think recognizing, Larry makes a really good point, that we need more information on some of this to really make a reasoned and accurate decision on it. So do you feel comfortable filling this out individually, just preliminarily, and then having a deeper discussion on it? Let me look at the lineup for our study sessions. But
Yeah,
so we have performance measures around college readiness, what we see typically this time of year.
so is that on the 10th?
That's on February 10th.
That's the next part. And maybe we can extend it by an hour? Do we need more, I mean, maybe we come an hour earlier?
It's your use of time, so if you feel that that's a
I'm
more
happy.
pressing use of
Yeah,
time,
I-
certainly can
I'm
move
sure
those
Dawn
to a
would be
different
happy
time.
to.
Because I agree with Sandy, I think we need the more detail we can put around this for folks, I think would be helpful.
So, I'm sorry, what day was that?
The 10th.
The 10th, so coming an hour before the
So
board meeting.
we're suggesting a 4 o'clock start time for that. Nope, sorry, we're suggesting an
2:30?
extra hour because it's a
Oh, that's
It's a 4
So we have
o'clock
to go an
meeting,
hour
so it would be
hour
an
later.
additional hour
Yeah.
on the end of it. Unless we came before the 4 o'clock meeting.
Which is fine with me. I mean, I don't know.
I can do
if
either
Dawn's-
one.
Either one is fine. Perhaps if we're going to have staff.
Thinking we'll capture
Yeah,
staff a
maybe
little bit easier
before.
if we do it before.
Then they don't have to stay.
I don't want to make them stay later than we already make them stay. So are we okay with earlier?
Yes.
So starting at
Absolutely.
3,
Start at 3?
2:30?
2:30.
2:30?
2:30.
Does that work for
And once we're here, you know,
Just so
we
happy
don't
to
want
be
to keep
here.
having
We don't
to
wanna
come
leave.
back And like you said, we want to make some decisions
Yeah.
sooner rather than later.
So I'm hearing 2:30 on February 10th for a study session. Can I just be clear on the topic of the study session, the intended outcome of the study session?
Parameters?
We would be going through the parameters, having
So
done it
to
individually
review the-
beforehand.
Review the start time parameters. Review and discuss start time parameters.
And the ramifications of each choice, is that correct?
And you had said coming to the table with what we weren't
What you would just find flat unacceptable. I think, is
unacceptable
where
to
we-
cut out.
Where we start,
Right.
yeah.
And that is a draft document, so I would like one more opportunity for us to circle around it in cabinet on Monday morning to see if there are other variables that we might be missing that should be included. I mean, you can certainly start with what's there, but we'd want to take a closer look at it if you're in that.
And I would really request that if, I'm sorry, Sandy.
No, that's okay.
If we could pair that with the scenarios, just, even if it's just us doing it and saying, okay, this kind of fits here or here, understanding that we need more information, it might help us to move faster, and then we can kind of see where people are at with the different scenarios that we're willing to accept also.
I don't think any of us want to drag it out.
No, I know.
No, but that's, yeah, if we can, that would be good, I'm in agreement.
There's some scenarios where it says cut all the programs, so we could, if we did our interview, we could cross that one out, right?
Right.
I mean, there's some we might be able to eliminate or say,
And then it's a smaller grouping to.
Yeah, that's what I'm
To really
thinking.
discuss, yeah. Is that okay?
Sandy, I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. So kind of along those lines, I just had an aha moment talking with the secondary principal. They're in the process of putting together their master schedule for this coming fall, I believe, yes? Because
Starting in the next month, yes.
because they are registering kids in a month for this coming fall. And these different scenarios, I imagine, will have an impact on the options that kids will be choosing. Specifically like a 9 o'clock or even an 8:30 start time. At 8:30, say this fall, would put 7th period ending at 4:15. That may change a student's preference as to whether they take a 7th period. And so I'm wondering if there's some way to ask our principals how soon they're going to need this information for a change this fall as they're putting together their master schedules and registering kids. I guess I don't want to be in a situation where we register kids and then after they've registered for this fall say, oh, by the way,
Right.
here's when you're going to school this fall, and then they're saying, oh, I don't want a 7th period, or I can't take the CTE class, or I don't get bused into the CTE, and that's no longer then an option for me, or whatever change that, and then they're having to re-up their master schedule. So I guess maybe some information on how that could potentially impact them, or
I'm not certain that they would necessarily know that. I mean, I think it would
Okay.
be through the registration process, students would have to sort of declare, because I can see it being no impact or perhaps a positive impact on desirability of 7th period, or I could see it potentially driving movement of more of 7th periods to 0 periods.
right. Well, and that's what I'm getting at is, so we register kids in a month and then a short time later say, oh, here is the changes, whatever they may be. Then that causes students to come back and say, well, now I want 0 period, or now I actually want 7th period, or now I can't take the CTU because of whatever change we've implemented. How much of that is problematic, I guess?
So looking at the options, do board members still feel like 2015, maybe we could start there, 2015 is a viable option?
I'd like to look still at 2015. I think there's a lot on the scenarios that don't apply for 2015, but I do see a couple options on 2015 that I think that we could implement if possible. I mean, that's what I would like to shoot for. But that's, we heard what Dawn said.
Yeah.
That's why I was saying if we had if we kind of could say, look at it and go, here's what 3 scenarios we see as possibilities. then we might find one that we all kind of fall
I
on
think you,
together.
but it almost seems like you have to, that's the step that follows the identification of acceptable parameters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I still think 2015 is possible. It just depends on where we get on that way. Even moving the system back to 7:40 or 8 o'clock. Because there was an option on there for 7:40, that I don't think involved a lot of extra costs, right?
No,
No.
it was the lowest cost, besides the.
And is the rest of the board
Because we talked about staying.
willing to weigh in on this?
It's 800K.
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 All right.
Yeah,
That was a good
so, yeah, where are we? Are we gonna wait till the next meeting and then talk about parameters?
Yeah, you know, so there's so much that we're talking
Yeah.
about, it's difficult to know what you all want. I mean, this is our time to talk about it. If there's no will on the board to make a change in 2015, then delaying that discussion doesn't make any sense. I mean, we can continue the discussion about the other parameters, but if there is, then we would defer. So that's kind of why it's back to that chicken and egg
Right.
scenario. There isn't really a clear, to me, step, because which comes first?
And keep the study session.
Right.
We would absolutely keep the study session, because we have,
Talk about.
whether we
what
start in
the-
2015 or not, we still have lots to talk about on what's
Correct,
acceptable
yeah.
and when.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then talk about what you're willing to keep, what we're not, and give us, and we could further hash that out at that meeting when Storm is here also.
Right. And I don't see us being able to have that conversation without all 5 of us present.
Yeah, I think that's not right.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I know I serve at your will, so.
And I think that will give us,
you-
we can
you
ask
tell me
more
what you want.
questions, you know, we can ask, with the staff, after we've looked at this, we can ask deeper questions at that time. What does 2015 look like if we move it back to 7:40, if we move it back to 8 o'clock? So we just have this preliminary document. Now we can look at what programs we can keep or not keep, and then have that opportunity to have that discussion at the next study session.
So I'll just wade in here and say that to me, 2015 is still not a viable option. I continue to feel like the strength of our EDTF process is the process, and the vetting that it's had, and the rolling it out to the community and getting a response, and all of those pieces that are important to hear all of the voices. And I don't feel like doing it in 2015 would allow us to do that. There are lots of questions I still have that would need to be answered before I knew how to roll it out. One of them is, why did the Hispanic community rate this low? What challenges are they seeing that we could perhaps address? We didn't ask how people felt about later release for the elementary schools, moving the whole system, so I think that there's a gap in information there that we have. And are we addressing the resulting challenges? And I still think, last year we instituted like a base grade for our athletes, and are trying to raise the academic bar, and now we're saying it's okay to miss more school. I see that as an inconsistent message personally. So I still don't see a way to do it in a reasonable, rational way with the necessary community input by 2015. So that is still my feeling.
Even to 7:40.
Even to 7:40, I think some of the comments that we saw in the survey were, if you're gonna make a change, don't do 10 minutes. Or don't do little change. I think that what we heard from the bus drivers is that that also had an impact, and we just don't have enough information from community. I saw on the survey, I noticed that the scores, the support took a dive when we asked about operating at a lower state efficiency rating.
That's
So I
what I
just
brought
think
up on
there
this.
are lots of pieces that we don't have answers to, that we need more time to get answers to. So I just don't see 2015 as a reasonable option. And that won't change between now and the next meeting, so.
That's what I mentioned at the study session, that the lowest score was the efficiency. That's why I asked that question. Are we
Yeah.
talking hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of dollars? Because that could make a big difference. If it's hundreds, then that probably doesn't have the same impact.
And I'll just add that what we heard today, the rest of what we heard in the study session, there are a number of areas of need that we are not addressing that we could definitely put more money towards. And so there are just so many questions I still have that would prevent me from wanting to roll this out in 2015. I just feel like I need more questions answered by the community.
So I'll weigh in. I am very apprehensive about spending multiples of millions of dollars by this September without understanding exactly how people feel about that. And unfortunately, that eliminates a lot of the spreadsheet. Besides the programmatic implications, it's a lot of money to spend outside of the classroom without understanding a lot of the implications. Personally, I would like to continue to explore column D. You know, I've always hoped that we could find, that's the 20-minute move. I've always hoped we could find ways of adding some incremental, whether it be a 2nd through 7th period options more robustly rolled out through the district. I've always been optimistic we could find some intermediate steps before 2017. And so that's where I stand. I'd like to, you know, still discuss options at the next meeting, but I would not be honest if I wasn't worried about all the options that have, without even buying buses, just the operational costs of over $2 million and up, so.
Just to be clear, option D, to my reading, does still require the addition of 16
Right.
buses and drivers. So that's a,
It's still an impact, but it was, you know, a much smaller impact, relatively speaking.
compared
I
to some of
think
the
the
other.
only scenario that we had here that wasn't a financial impact was C.
So I'm just going to ask a clarifying question. Are we voting
No,
on whether to
not-
do 2015 or?
no.
So I guess I'm a little concerned about the trend of this conversation when that's not an action item that's been on the
No,
agenda.
for sure.
That's why I had suggested that we picked out 3 scenarios and came to a study session, which could include, I could have one from 2017, one from 2016, and one from 2015. So I guess that's where I was trying to go with that, like pick out, look at this and what 3 do you see as possibilities? And my thought was I would be looking at all 3 categories, or at least 2017, 2015, not. So I was trying to keep it at a broad.
So I guess what I would suggest is that we have the study session and we have this robust conversation, and then on the agenda, at least have that 2015
So
or
define the time.
define the time, again, for the community's well-being,
Yeah.
what's coming, what's happening.
Does that work for board members?
Yes. So we'll have an
So we'll have a
action
study
item.
session at 2:30. We'll have an action item on the,
I'm going to suggest we're going
Agenda.
to need more study session time than now.
So the action item, as I heard Sandy say, it would be to identify the year. Or actually even to identify whether 2015
Yes.
is the
That's
year.
fine.
So it's your meeting, it's your action item.
No, we went here.
So looking at the list of the parameters, I mean, some of the parameters are, is it okay for K-12 students to be on a bus together? Is it okay to swap elementary? And so I would be hesitant as your advisor to suggest that you would have a conversation at 2:30 that says, let's just say for instance, yes, it's okay, it's acceptable for us to flip-flop elementary and high school start times, and then take a vote about an implementation timeline an hour later. I think that is a decision, a parameter that should be communicated widely to give people an opportunity to respond to that, because I imagine there's going to be a range of responses to that you're then going to want to subsequently consider. So I worry about getting a little too far ahead of communicating with people what you as a board believe is acceptable, because I think there's still going to be some commentary that's going to come back to you around those parameters.
And I agree. I guess the way my brain works is I've already gone through the parameters. I had my whole family take a poll. That there are they're teenagers, they get to weigh in. There are parameters that are more acceptable for 2017 than 2015. So I guess what I'm saying that there are parameters that are options for me if we have 2 years to roll them out, that are parameters that don't seem like realistic options in 7 months. So that, I guess that's going to be problematic for me to go too far down this road in this conversation without having some sense of when we're trying to implement it. But also, I don't believe we're going to be making decisions at the study session. I think we're just having a conversation, trying to get a sense of where people are at.
Well, and to start the narrowing, is that,
But what Larry is saying is that if we put an action item on there and make a decision on it, we've really prevented the community from weighing in on what our decision is. Normally
could we,
put-
could we start narrowing the parameters? Would that help us?
I think if you
the
narrow
funnel?
the parameters, then I would see a logical question would be, okay, with these parameters, staff go back and, again, I mean, it's going to sort of define the box a little better and go through the exercise again of telling us what might this look like then with these parameters for 2015, for 2016, or for 2017-18. I think that's probably a more realistic way to approach it than you could develop a set of parameters and decide on 2015, and if it involves something like adding a large number of buses or a large number of drivers, that still might not be something that's really practical for us to be able to pull off in that period of time. But not knowing exactly where you're going to land on all these parameters, but I would say those would be the drivers of timeline, should be the drivers of timeline in my opinion.
And that's the challenge, because time is an issue, because as Sandy observed, that we need to get the information to principals as soon as
Well,
possible.
I mean, when I'm looking at C and D, they keep all the options. I guess I'm getting a little bit confused by this dialogue, because if I look at, we have these scenarios put before us that are higher level, but when I look at options C and D, those don't add huge amounts of dollars comparatively to the other options. D obviously costs more, C costs, so I know we haven't weighed in with all the other reasoning why, but we're not talking about dropping programs in those two.
But,
But when
actually,
you-
I can get, I'm sorry to interrupt, I can get Larry's point, for example, shifting the entire system 40 minutes, then you have that discussion about what's the latest acceptable time for elementary kids.
Correct.
So that goes back to the parameter question more so than
Which
the
is in-
model
is-
question.
which is in
Right,
that-
it is in
that-
that document,
That document.
yeah.
Yeah.
I looked at it, I just don't remember that specific parameter.
And again, back to Larry's
Oh,
point,
I
making
see.
a decision following that study session is problematic if we haven't given the people who are now impacted by school getting out at, by their kids getting home at 5 o'clock. So you have an opportunity to talk to us as well.